What's up, poopers? Did you tear your meniscus and you're trying to rehab it conservatively? We're going to go over some of the key things to make sure you avoid when you're recovering from your meniscus injury. My name is Dr. Marco Lopez, Doctor of Physical Therapy and Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist and co-founder of the Basketball Doctors. In this video, we're going to go over step by step some of the mistakes you should be avoiding to ensure you properly get back onto the court after a meniscus tear. All right, guys, we're going to go over the key things with the meniscus. So before we dive into the mistakes, the key things that you need to know about the meniscus is the cushion of the knee. We have a great video explaining everything about the meniscus 101 if you click below in our description. But just think about the meniscus as the cushion of the knee. It helps provide shock absorption and also provides joint congruity in the joint to allow it to glide through its range of motion and everything. So if you tear your meniscus, one of the key things is to first find out if you have locking or not. If you have locking, mechanical locking, then you might need to have surgery. But for today, we're going to talk about people that don't have any mechanical symptoms, and we're going to show you what things to avoid when you're rehabbing, and we're just going to go over the conservative side. So not the surgical rehab side. This is the side that you just tore your meniscus and you're not having surgery, and we're going to go over the mistakes. So the first one is that people sometimes overload it early on. So what do I mean by overloading? So when you tear your meniscus, like I mentioned, it's the cushion of the knee. Sometimes you got to monitor your load. So you might not be able to go back into your normal standing walking routine right away after you tore it. You gotta slowly, gradually build it up. Even when you feel good, you wanna manage your load. Don't overdo it, because what happens is people tear their meniscus, they stop having pain, they're like, oh, I think I'm good. And they go back to doing hikes, they go back to doing all this stuff, and they haven't been rehabbing their knee. And what happens is their knee gets overloaded and their knee swells up. After a meniscus tear that people feel good, after 2 weeks or so, and they're like, all right, I'm just gonna go back to my normal routine. Or if they have a job that requires them to be on their feet for a prolonged period of time, that's gonna end up adding load over time with the knee, and it just gets overloaded. So usually what I tell people, try to avoid standing for too long period of time. You wanna just gradually build up that tolerance. So if you know that your knee swells up after you walk for an hour, then maybe walk for 30 minutes, then ramp it up to an hour. But this is huge, because when there's swelling and when you overload it, that leads to swelling, and that swelling is going to irritate the knee, get your quad weaker, affect your ability to walk. So make sure when you're returning back from that meniscus injury is you're slowly loading up. That's crucial, especially when you go back onto the court. You want to first start one-on-one, maybe 30 minutes, then go up to 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour. Just slowly build it up. We just don't want to overload it. When we overload it, we take 2 steps back, and we want to make sure we're progressively overloading it. That way the knee could tolerate, and whenever the knee swells up, that means you did too much. So that's the first thing. Don't overload it. Number 2 is people tend to push range of motion early on too much and too fast. When it comes to that, this is talking about right after injury. So like I mentioned, the cushion of the knee, the meniscus, it increases pressure at end ranges. So when you get your knee fully straight and fully bent all the way, that increases that contact pressure on the meniscus. So if you tore it there and really forcing your knee to get straight or forcing your knee to bend all the way, a lot of people like to try to get their heel towards their butt. They're like, hey, I injured my meniscus, I'm really cranking on the knee and it kind of hurts. That's because you're irritating the meniscus. So just slowly, gradually work on your range of motion. Obviously we're gonna push it, but you gotta listen to your body. If it hurts, sharp pain, then don't push it too much. We want to keep that pain level between a 2 or a 3, because the more we push it towards the end ranges, the more we irritate that meniscus. So we want to slowly, gradually get that range of motion back. So that's number 2 mistake. The first one, overload it, don't overload it. Number 2 is pushing that range of motion. Number 3, a lot of the times we see that people don't use isolated strengthening for their quads during this rehab. What do I mean by that? So when it comes to quads, they're like, yeah, I've been doing my squats, but a lot of the times you can't really target the quads there early on, and the quads are kind of king for that shock absorption, for that deceleration. So you want to make sure you work on some isolated open chain, meaning just kicking out your knee with some resistance and then coming back down. So your foot's not in contact with the ground, it's open chain. Like think about that knee extension machine. because that's really gonna isolate the quad and really get you to be able to target the quads, which are hard to target early on. If anyone's had a meniscus tear, when you try to squatting, even if you go a partial squat, you won't even feel the quad working too much. You'll feel your knee joint, kneecap. So isolated work, isometrics at different ranges of motion, where your knees hanging off the table or something, pushing against something, that's great to really isolate the quad and allow you to really start getting that quad stronger and feeling that quad. So that's a big thing, is make sure you're adding in that isolated isometric open chain movement as part of your rehab. Another key mistake that people end up doing is they go deep into knee flexion with weight bearing. So as we talked about early on, don't push that range of motion early on because that's gonna irritate the meniscus. Same goes into deep squats. So a lot of people like to do like those deep squats or deep lunges that I've been seeing all over the internet after they tear the meniscus, because they say that's gonna help build up their meniscus, but that's actually gonna irritate your meniscus. Slowly take your time with those deep movements, because the deeper you go into flexion, meaning the deeper squat, like the ass to grass squat, that's gonna increase the contact pressure in your knee joint. And we talked about the increased pressure, that's just gonna put more pressure on the meniscus, and when it's torn, it's irritated, that's gonna cause there to be some pain. So make sure when you're rehabbing, you're avoiding, not avoiding completely, but early on, you're not going into those deep movements. You want to gradually work your way into those deep knee flexion movements. I usually don't like to do those at all in the first several weeks, and then just slowly, gradually get them back. I just don't want to irritate the meniscus from my experience, but try to stay in that pain-free range, then slowly just go into deeper ranges of motion. Another key mistake is that people often kind of forget about the hip and the ankle. So remember, your knee's situated between the ankle and the hip. We want to get the hip stronger. We want to work the glutes there. We also want to get that whole foot and ankle structure strong. The calf muscle, the soleus muscle. The soleus muscle is responsible for a lot of the deceleration and absorption of shock when going down. So you really got to get those calf muscles stronger. So whenever you're jumping, running, it's going to allow us to offset some of the pressure in the meniscus. Same thing with the hip. The stronger we have the hip, we're able to dissipate those forces through the hip and the knee, not just the knee. Because the more forces we have going through the knee joint, the more likely there might be some irritation in the meniscus. That's why we want the hip to help out. So those are some of the main key mistakes we see with rehab following a meniscus tear. So kind of go over them. 1, don't overload it. 2, don't push the range of motion too much early on. Just gradually get the range of motion going. 3, a lot of the times we need to get some isolation work on the quad, some isometrics, get that quad stronger. Another thing is, don't forget to work on the hip and ankle. And the last one, don't go into that deep knee flexion early on. Don't go to those deep squats. Hopefully you guys learned a lot about this video. If you guys have any questions regarding meniscus injuries or treatments, comment below or send us an email. We also work in Los Angeles, California, and Orange County. So if you're around the local area, send us a DM or an email. Check out our website for our online rehab programs. We are the Basketball Doctors. Let's ball for life.